Hello there guys, RMP792 here. Right, the last one of these Warhammer 40k primers was on the Eldar, and I said at the end of that since I talked about one of the oldest races in the 40k universe, in this one I was going to talk about one of the youngest, the Tau. The Tau were actually only introduced to the 40k universe, good lord, it was probably going on 15-20 years ago, wasn't it? Bloody hell. Anyway. But the Tau are very, very young as a species, in terms of they've only actually had space flight, serious space flight, I should say. I would assume they've been pootling around with sort of our current level of space flight for quite a long time, but only very, very recently have they actually started expanding out into the galaxy, as in the last few hundred years or so, from the actual timeline. Now, granted, a few hundred years ago is kind of meaningless when you're talking about the 40k universe, because the actual time that's spanned by it is so vast. But anyway, the Tau are a very young, but they are very, very technologically advanced. Their technology is advancing at a frankly terrifying rate, and they've already developed an awful lot of very powerful weapons. The main thing that the Tau have at the moment, or don't have rather, is they don't have psychers. The Tau's connection to the warp is actually incredibly weak, to the point where they almost don't have one at all, which, among other things, means that they don't seem to be able to get possessed by chaos demons, which is a perk, but it also massively limits their ability to travel faster than light. They can't go through the warp properly, because if you try that without a navigator, you'll bug it. You will either get lost or you will die, and the second one is a lot more likely than the first. So rather than actually travelling directly through the warp, they quote-unquote skim the edge of it, which is faster than light, but it's a lot slower than properly going through the warp, but it doesn't require a navigator. So they are expanding relatively slowly, but they are expanding. The Tau actually have a very interesting caste system. There are 5 castes of Tau. That's Earth, Fire, Water, Air, and the Ethereal caste. And I'll go through them in order. The one that's most commonly known is, of course, the Fire caste, who are their warrior caste. The Fire caste are a little bit physically stronger than the other Tau, though I should mention that the Tau are a very physically weak species compared to human beings. I could take a Tau in a punching match, and that's saying something. I have many qualities. Physical strength is not one of them. But the Tau are, while a very weak physically species, they are very, very intelligent in the grand scheme of things. So their Fire caste uses a lot of very powerful, very advanced weaponry. They like their plasma weapons, their rail guns, and they compensate for the fact that they can't fight themselves by using effectively armoured power suits. And these range from the sort of smaller end, which are basically just body armour with a little bit of extra mobility in them and things like that, right the way up to sort of massive hulking battle suits that are basically mecha. Where there's just a pilot sitting in the middle of them, controlling it internally, but the arms and everything else is so much larger than he is that his hands aren't even close to the actual gloves of the suit. So that's pretty much the Tau's preferred combat doctrine. They've also got a lot of very powerful tanks and that kind of stuff, and they really like their hovering tanks. So they've got a lot of mobility going for them as well, combined with devastating firepower. They're, by definition, not as tough as a lot of the other races, especially when they get into melee distance. Tau forces will get butchered in melee range because they just can't handle it, even with their incredible mecha suits. To compensate for that, the Tau have actually formed alliances with a number of other races, including a race called the Kroot. The Kroot are a very minor race in the grand scheme of things, but they have allied themselves with the Tau, and the Kroot like hand-to-hand combat, so the Tau use them basically as shock troops, while their other units pour fire into the enemy. So that's the Tau Fire caste. Next are the Earth caste. The Earth caste are basically their builders, and and they do exactly what it implies. They build things, and they can build really magnificent things when they want to, because again, they have the technology to do it. So the Tau, there's not much known about the casts other than Fire Warriors, obviously, because the focus of the Warhammer 40k universe is on the combat. But there's all sorts of interesting little bits and pieces you can pick up in the lore. For example, the Aircast are basically their pilots. So if you're going after a Tau fighter craft, the odds are that's got an Aircast pilot. Who the Aircast are kind of. These 4 casts basically used to be constantly fighting each other in one regard or another, and they're all subtly different physically from each other. As I say, the fire cast tend to be a little bit bigger, a little bit stronger. The air cast are very, very sort of light and kind of ethereal is the wrong word, given that there is, as I mentioned, the ethereal cast. But anyway, but you sort of know what I mean by that. You get the impression that the air cast probably would have eventually evolved to actually take flight themselves if technology hadn't, effectively done that part for them. Then you've got the water cast, who are. They do an awful lot of jobs to the water cast, but among other things, they're diplomats and they're ambassadors and that kind of thing. And again, the water cast are. I don't know a lot about them, but I probably should just read a load of articles on the wikis before I actually try to do these vlogs, shouldn't I? But anyway. But the most interesting of the casts are the ethereal cast. Now, the thing about the Tau is that they were constantly fighting each other and doing all that stuff that young races do, getting into squabbles and being kind of petty, like, us at the moment, as the human species. We are a very petty and kind of pathetic species. But the thing that stopped the Tau from either one of them gaining complete dominance over the others, or from them actually wiping themselves out, were the Ethereals. And the Ethereals came right the hell out of nowhere, and nobody knows where they came from. But the Ethereals effectively mediated peace between all the different Tau factions, and then basically took over. And there's some interesting theories that the Ethereals are actually Tau psychers, and that's how they're able to influence the other Tau. There's other theories that say it might be pheromone-based or something like that, but when an Ethereal turns up, every Tau there will listen to them. And that has allowed them to turn themselves into a ruling class. And it's at the point where if there's an Ethereal on a planet who gets killed, every Tau there will, I won't necessarily kill themselves, but if you want to break the back of a Tau force, you find their Ethereal and you put a bullet through his head. That in both Dawn of War Dark Crusade and Dawn of War Soulstorm, when you take out the enemy Ethereal, you win. You drive the Tau the hell off the planet, because it's not worth it anymore. Not without their Ethereal to lead them. Which, again, I suspect that, yes, I think the fan theories are right. I think the Ethereals are psychers. Whether it's on a conscious level or not, that you can quibble over, but I suspect that's how they're able to exert control over the other Tau and actually effectively control the species. Now, that arguably means that the Ethereals are vulnerable to chaos contamination, and from there you get into even more issues of the Tau as a species. Because the Tau's entire philosophy is focused around something they call the greater good. The Tau's battle cry is for the greater good! And that is basically exactly what it sounds like. It's a philosophy of, we're going to do this thing, it may be unpleasant, but it's for the greater good of our civilization, it's for the greater good of our species. And that leads to a very self-sacrificing feeling among a lot of the Tau. They will willingly lay down their lives for the greater good of their species. And the thing about the Tau is, they would perfectly happily make peace with pretty much everybody else in the galaxy. They'll fight when they have to, but unlike the Imperium, they don't have any particular desire to wipe out all the other aliens. If they genuinely thought it was necessary, and let's be honest, it's the 40k universe, so it kind of is, they would kill pretty much everybody else in the galaxy. But they would never do it because they wanted to. They would do it because they felt they had to for the greater good. And there's a classic comment which is, more and greater atrocities have been committed in the name of the greater good than almost any other thing in human history. And that is very, very true. People will do the worst, most horrific things because they believe they are the right thing, or worse, they are the necessary thing. It's the classic, I'm going to blow up this city because there's some bad guys there, and I wish there was another way, but we have to stop these bad guys, and if that means all these innocent people get killed, so be it. And people can really talk themselves into doing some fairly horrific things in the name of the greater good, and that's what the Tau do. The Tau are always willing to take on Imperials who wish to convert, but in particular the ending of Dark Crusade, if you play it through as the Tau, is very, very sinister, because it implies that they basically end up sterilizing the humans on the planet Kronos after they conquer it, because they can't risk it. For the greater good of the Tau, they cannot risk the Imperials kind of forming a resistance movement. So the easiest way to do that is to keep an eye on them, sterilize them, and that problem will sort itself out in the next 50 odd years or so. Which is an incredibly they could have solved that problem by just shooting every single one of them, but that's not how they work. They didn't kill anyone; they just sterilized them, and that's the end of it. And it's the Tau. I honestly like the Tau because I can respect the attitude of trying to better themselves, trying to do better, but they will push it way too far in the service of the greater good. So the Tau as a species, I like the concept, and to be fair, that they do some interesting things with them. The Tau are another one of there is a very short list of races that the Imperium will form temporary alliances with, whereby if the local Imperial commander says, right, we're getting overrun by the forces of chaos or the forces of the orcs, we're going to make a temporary alliance with these guys. The Tau are on the short list of people where if you even suggest it, they won't shoot you in the face immediately. The others are basically the Eldar, and that's about it. You can, some Inquisitors will argue that you can use the orcs as proxies, and I'll talk about the orcs in a future video. But the Eldar and the Tau are pretty much the only two the Imperium will agree to work with, at least on a short-term basis. I mean, the entire plot of the video game Fire Warrior, which came out when the Tau really were very new, basically amounted to the Tau go to get their Ethereal back after he's been captured by the Imperial forces. The Imperium, they get into a battle on board a starship. Then they discover that the local Imperial governor's been corrupted by Chaos, and the Chaos forces turn up, at which point the Space Marine captain basically says, right, you guys want to work together to fight this Chaos guy? Awesome. And then they go and defeat this Demon of Chaos together, which, that's the kind of thing that the Imperium will do when necessary, and the Tau are one of the few races they actually trust to do that with. That's not to say they wouldn't butcher them wholesale if they actually had the opportunity, but as I said, the Tau have very powerful ships in comparison to how young they are. I mean, their technological advance has been scary fast. As in another 500 years, they'll have completely outpaced the Imperium. You give it a full millennia, and especially once you factor in the Imperium's technological regression, the Tau could well be the next race that are going to rule the galaxy. Because that's the thing, it's a cyclical thing in the Warhammer 40k universe. Empires rise, empires fall, new empires rise, new empires fall, and so on and so on. And nothing really changes. War is a constant. War will always be. And is that a depressing look? Yes, it is. It's very much the universe goes through the occasional golden age, and then everything falls apart. And the interesting thing is, human society does actually mirror this pattern. In a lot of ways, you go through peaks and troughs and peaks and troughs, and it'll be kind of curious. I doubt I'll live long enough to see this particular cycle end, but I'll be curious to see how our civilization falls apart this time. Insert joke about Donald Trump being president here. Sorry, shouldn't get political on Warhammer 40k videos. But anyway, where was I? Oh yes, but the Tau themselves are a very kind of fascinating race, and I'll freely admit I love a lot of the designs of their weapons and their armor. In particular, is it the Crisis battle suits I'm thinking of, or am I thinking of the? No, I'm thinking of the Broadside battle suits, which are basically these suits with a couple of missile launchers for hands, and these massive rail guns mounted to their backs. And those are so powerful that they basically have to stamp their feet into the ground and fully entrench themselves in position, and then they bring the rail guns to bear. And they are, in Dawn of War, the Tau do not have turrets. Most of the other races have some variation of the bolter turret or whatever. The Tau do not. The Tau just have these broadside battle suits, which they basically just march out, slap into position, bring railguns to bear, and they are damn difficult to kill because those railguns have massive range and will punch through armor like it's not even there. The same goes for their best. The best thing they have in that game, officially the most powerful unit they have is the Krutux, which is this giant monster, which they got from the Krut. I disagree with that. I never use the Krutux. I just instead deploy a couple of hammerhead tanks and watch them roll over everything. So those things basically have these sort of plasma miniguns on the front and rail guns, on their bow, and they just hover around blowing away everything you point them at. And especially if you support them with a solid infantry screen, that will beat pretty much anything else in the game. And that really does sum the Tau up. They are all about overwhelming firepower. They're all about standing together. And again, it all comes back to the greater good philosophy. Everything links back to that. The sacrifice of the individual for the good of the whole. And I'm sure somebody's going to bring up, oh, well, that's communism, isn't it? And I kind of get where that argument comes from. It's weirdly, if you want to talk about communists in the the 40k universe, I'll freely bet the Imperial Guard will always remind me of the Russians in the Second World War. You have political commissars who will just shoot their own men if they try to desert, and that will always put me in mind of that. But the attitude of for the greater good of the whole. Here's what it is. Each Tau is a cell. As far as from the point of view of the Tau species, each individual Tau is a single cell, and they all come together to make up the body of the Tau species as a whole. And let's face it, you or I, we lose cells all the time. These things happen. But as long as they fulfill their function, that's fine. Tau do not. They wouldn't kill one of their own pointlessly. But if if he or she dies in the line of service, then they have served their function and they have died with honor. And that would logically make the ethereals, effectively the brain. Lose the brain and the body dies. Which is why they're so fanatical about protecting the ethereals, because there are a hell of a lot fewer ethereals than there are of the other Tau castes. As in, it's literally thousands of other Tau for one ethereal. Which, as I say, kind of continues my theory that they're probably psychers. It's the beginning of the Tau's awakening as a psychic species. And again, that's a theory that I have. I don't know if that's confirmed anywhere in 40k lore. I'm pretty sure it's one of those things that's suspected, but it would make sense. But yes, that is a basic primer on the Tau. A very interesting species with some interesting potential and quite a few dark edges. So I haven't actually decided which species to cover next in these 40k primers. If you're a 40k fan and you want a particular request, feel free to stick it in the comments. If you're not a 40k fan but you've heard rumblings about one particular thing or other that you'd like me to talk about, feel free, again, comment section. And just generally, thank you very much for watching these primers, especially if you are a 40k fan and you're just watching it through to see when I get stuff wrong. So, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you in future videos.